If you're planning on purchasing a home in 2025, you're going to want to watch this entire video because there are two shocking developments that you need to know about that will definitely impact your home buying experience and the home buying process, and maybe even impact your ability to buy a home at all. My name is Sharon Smoot, and I'm a realtor in Atlanta, Georgia. And today I want to talk to you about two major changes that will impact how buyers purchase homes in the future. The first has to do with the buyer brokerage agreement or buyer's engagement. It's called different things in different states. But in Georgia, for as long as I've been a realtor, one of the requirements is that in order for a real estate agent to represent a buyer as a client versus as a customer, there has to be a signed buyer brokerage agreement. Now, in different states, that might not be the rule, but in Georgia, that's how it's always been. And there were no hard and fast rules as to when that document had to be signed. For many, many years, I preferred to get it signed before I ever showed a property. And one of the reasons for that is that I wanted it to be clear how the commission would be paid. And there are always tweaks and changes to the standard forms that we use in Georgia, and that might be the same for other states. But what the form generally said, what that buyer brokerage agreement generally said, was that the brokerage representing the buyer expected to get paid X. And let's just say that that X is 3%. And that customarily the seller would pay the buyer's broker's commission. In the event that the seller was unable or unwilling to pay any or all of the buyer's broker's commission, then the buyer would be expected to make up the difference. And like I said, over the years, there have been little tweaks and changes um, just to lend clarity to that provision of the buyer brokerage agreement. And then the buyer brokerage agreement just sets out all of the obligations of the broker's licensee, that's the buyer's agent, and then the obligations and the rights of the buyer. So after the Great Recession, I became a little bit lax. I didn't always get that document signed up front. And I know of realtors who would wait until they were sending over an offer for their buyer to sign or sitting down with their buyer to sign an offer. And that's when they would have them sign the buyer brokerage agreement. Everybody did it a little bit differently. And, it worked well enough that way. That has changed because of a lawsuit filed against the National Association of Realtors. NAR is short for the National Association of Realtors. So if I say NAR, that is what I'm referring to, National Association of Realtors. So this lawsuit was filed against NAR, and I'm not going to go into all the details of the lawsuit. If you're curious to know what that was about, you can Google it and find out. They settled the lawsuit. And as a result of the settlement, anyone who is a realtor, and let me explain the difference between a realtor and a real estate agent. A realtor is someone who is a member of a local board and by extension is a member of the National Association of Realtors. When I say local board, I mean a local real estate board. Any realtor must adhere to NAR's Code of Ethics. A real estate agent, on the other hand, is not a member of a local board and is not a member of NAR. A real estate agent is not bound by NAR's Code of Ethics. Now, whether a person is a realtor or a real estate agent, they are bound by their state's laws. So that's the difference between a realtor and a real estate agent. So this settlement only impacts realtors. I would imagine, and I don't have any statistics on it, but that there are some brokerages out there who do not require their licensees, their agents to be members of NAR, but who will elect to comport themselves with the terms of this settlement. So this settlement says, among other things, that the real estate agent must secure that buyer's brokerage agreement before showing any houses. Why is that? Because of the next shocking development. This shocking development impacts compensation. And there is a change in the terminology that we use. We used to refer to the money that real estate agents got paid as commissions. As a result of this settlement, we now refer to the money that real estate agents get paid as compensation. And just to be clear, the agent is not actually getting paid by the buyer or the seller. The agent is getting paid by their brokerage. The commission, what we used to call it, and the compensation, what we call it now, is actually paid to the brokerage that the agent works for. Okay? So let's just keep that clear. If I use agent and broker and compensation all in one sentence, or I use those terms interchangeably, what I really mean is the compensation being paid to the brokerage, okay? We get kind of fast and loose with the words that we use, and we really just need to be a lot more careful for the sake of clarity and precision. Okay, so this settlement says that compensation is negotiable. And let me explain to you right quick kind of how the whole thing works, okay? So if I am taking a listing, I'm going to talk to the seller about commission. And I'm really talking about how things were done before this lawsuit. And as a part of that discussion, we are going to agree on the commission, the total commission that the seller is willing to pay. And, one of the things in this lawsuit that is just a little bit troubling to me, or in this settlement that's a little bit troubling to me, is this emphasis on commissions or compensation being negotiable. That's always been the case. So, that's just an aside. But anyway, so I'm talking to the sellers. We agree, for instance, that they are going to pay a total commission of 6%. During that discussion, I tell them that I'm going to share that 6% with a cooperating broker who brings the buyer. And I tell them how much of that 6% I'm willing to share, or that I'm going to share. And all of that becomes a part of the listing agreement. In this new era, the conversation is going to be very similar. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, compensation is negotiable. I typically expect to get 3%. How do you feel about that? They say yes or no. We go back and forth, and we reach an agreement that they're going to pay me X, okay? Let's just say they agree on the 3%. The next portion of the conversation is going to be, how much are you willing to pay a cooperating broker? And what you need to understand is that it is unlikely that I will bring the buyer. More likely than not, it's going to be an agent from another brokerage that brings the buyer, or maybe even an agent inside of my brokerage. But it will be more likely than not another agent who brings the buyer. So taking into consideration that they are expending their time and energy to show your property and to help their buyer come to the decision to make an offer on your property, And they're going to be guiding their client through the process of buying your home. How much are you willing to pay a cooperating broker? And they're going to decide on a number. It could be 0, it could be 3%, it could be 4%, it could be 10%, whatever they might decide. All of that is going to be in the listing agreement. And previously, before the lawsuit, it was customary, not required, but customary for the seller to pay the buyer's broker's commission. Okay? And like I mentioned, that buyer brokerage agreement has a paragraph that would set out how much the buyer's broker expected to get paid and what would happen if the buyer's broker was or I'm sorry, if the seller was unable or unwilling to pay that full amount. Because we are moving away from that customary practice of the seller paying the buyer's broker's commission, we need to establish from jump that the buyer may be responsible for paying their own broker's compensation. And the only way to do that is with a signed agreement. So when you're calling around to agents trying to find someone to represent you, there is a more than 90% chance that you're going to hear that you have to sign a buyer brokerage agreement before you can see a house. And a lot of buyers are like, wait a minute, why do you want me to sign something? I don't even know you. I don't know if I like you. I just want to see some houses. But this is how it is. This is one of the shocking developments that you're going to have to sign that buyer brokerage agreement before you can see a house. Okay. Now, that agreement doesn't have to be for some long extended period of time. It doesn't have to be 3 months or 6 months or what have you. You can limit that agreement to specific addresses or to a week, whatever. And that's something that you need to speak with any of the agents that you're interviewing about and find out what their practice is. Is it possible that you can limit the agreement to 123 Main Street, 456 Green Street, and 2212 Landover Cove? If you can do that, that's going to be in the agreement. And when I say if you can do that, if the agent agrees to that, that would be in the buyer brokerage agreement. And one of the reasons why it is so important to nail that down is that you don't want any confusion over when that compensation is due. So if I, as an agent, find a house for you, I identify, properties that you are interested in seeing. That buyer brokerage agreement says that it applies to these properties. I show you those properties and the agreement expires and you haven't made an offer on any of them. Then 3 weeks later, you decide that you're still interested in one of the properties that I showed you and you want to make an offer, but you're dealing with a different agent. That kind of sets up what could be considered a procuring cause. A procuring cause. That's a mouthful, right? A procuring cause battle between the two agents. And we don't want to deal with any of that. So just understand that you're going to have to sign that agreement and it's going to be specific because everybody wants to protect themselves. Nobody wants to be in a fight over compensation, anything like that. So the back to the second development, I kind of went back into the first, but back to that second development. You may be required to pay your own broker's compensation. And you're like, okay, well, how am I going to do that? I have been saving for 3 years, so I have enough for a down payment and my earnest money. And now you're springing on me that I might have to pay some compensation. I can't tell you in the past 6 months or so how many buyers I have had say, you know what, I'm going to step away from this process when they hear that they may have to pay my broker's commission, my broker's compensation. See, I'm still getting used to using the new term, compensation, not commission. But anyway, so how are you going to handle this? That buyer brokerage agreement is going to set out how much the broker expects to be paid. And keep in mind that compensation is negotiable. I can't emphasize that enough. Compensation is negotiable. And you and the agent agree on a number, let's just say 3%. Well, what happens if you go and look at a property and you fall in love with that property and you find out after you've decided that you want to make an offer on it that the seller is offering zero to the buyer's broker? What are you going to do? So one of the important things is that you and the agent that you hire agree in writing as part of that buyer brokerage agreement how you're going to handle that compensation. That number that you agree on, whether it's 3%, 2%, 5%, whatever it might be, that's what your broker expects to get paid. And if there's a house that you want and the seller is unwilling to pay your broker's compensation, you're going to have to pay it. And what if you don't have the money to do that? So when you're working with your agent, you need to be really specific in that buyer brokerage agreement. What happens if we determine that the seller is unwilling to pay all or part of that 3% or that 4% or that 2%, whatever the number is? What happens if the seller is unwilling to pay that? All of that, those possibilities need to be set forth in that buyer brokerage agreement. In Georgia, they have created some boilerplate language to deal with those what ifs, but you need to be clear. And what some people are doing, if the buyer knows that they are unable or unwilling to pay any portion of their broker's compensation, they're asking their agent to put a provision in the special steps that says they are waiving their right to view any properties where the seller is not willing to pay the buyer's broker's compensation, whatever that number might be. It's in writing, so there will be no disagreements, no confusion. You won't be able to come back, 4 months from the time that the agreement expires and say, well, she refused to show me any of these properties. You're agreeing up front. And this is going to require some legwork on your agent's part to find out, is there any compensation being offered by the seller? Because another thing that changed is that we can no longer put in the listing how much compensation is being offered to the cooperating broker, the buyer's broker. So your agent is going to have to do some legwork, make some calls, send some text messages to find out what, if anything, is being offered to the buyer's broker. So if you're not in a position to pay your own agent's compensation, you might decide that you just want to put your home search on hold and try to save a little bit more money. Uh, and that's why I say this is a development that could impact your ability to purchase a home at all. And the thing about it is that there are as many sellers who aren't aware of these new developments as there are buyers. But as people become more and more informed, I think that there are going to be a good number of sellers who dig in their heels and say, well, why should I pay for the buyer's agent's compensation? I'm not doing that. I need to walk away from this transaction with as many dollars in my pocket as I can. And the thing about that is that that might be a little bit short-sighted and it might be cutting off their nose to spite their face because most agents do not have access to an unlimited number of prospective buyers. So if I list a house, I have uh, my contacts, maybe investors, what have you, buyers that I'm actively working with who may be interested in this property that I just listed. But 9 times out of 10, your buyer is going to be brought by another agent, not the agent that listed the house. So why would you want to turn off those prospective buyers by not offering to pay at least some portion of their agent's compensation? And the thing about it is that a lot of buyers just don't have that money to cover the cost of paying their broker's compensation. So it's just a lot to think about and a lot to be prepared for, especially for buyers. So those are the two shocking developments that will impact your home buying experience and maybe even your ability to purchase a home at all. If you have any questions about any of this, please drop it in the comments. And if you haven't already done so, be sure to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and click that notification bell so that you don't miss any future videos that I upload.